Welcome to Weekly Recaps, where we discuss some of the top stories in business, technology, and politics. Kicking it off, SK Hynix went public on the Nasdaq earlier this week. The South Korean chip manufacturer raised the most by a non-US company listed on the exchange at $26.5 billion, surpassing their predecessor Alibaba. This funding will go to further develop their chip manufacturing capabilities and providing new facilities. They debuted at $149 per share, so they're currently up 13% since Friday. Last week, 3 models were released by some of the top AI labs, including Grok 4.5, GPT 5.6, and Meta's new model MuSpark 1.1. And each of these models are designated for a specific use case, with Grok's being coding, OpenAI's being connecting to their new product ChatGPT work, which allows users integration to their entirety of their workflow, and then MuSpark 1.1 being built for specific agentic workflows. And where I really think this new model will excel is the click-through and essentially acting like an employee, because as we noted a few weeks back, Meta was training based on their employees' click-throughs and keystrokes. So I truly believe in the next few weeks, we're going to hear a lot of positive feedback from Meta's new AI model. Now, this week, we saw a lot of negative stories with AI as a whole, one of them being OpenAI getting sued by Apple over IP infringement. And the two companies have been partnered since 2024 to develop better products and intelligence for the Apple ecosystem. So Apple believes that through this partnership, OpenAI was allowed access to Apple's consumer hardware, which Apple believes has led OpenAI to building their own hardware products. And this is something that OpenAI announced about a year ago, and we haven't necessarily seen come to fruition yet. But as we mentioned last week, with companies going more and more vertical within their tech stack, this could have pretty large implications for OpenAI. Another punch in the gut for OpenAI is Fiji Sumo taking an extended medical leave as her health has not shown signs of recovery. Fiji was the number 2 executive in the company and responsible for a lot of ChatGPT's growth. So although she'll still be in an advisory role, since she's stepping down from full-time work, OpenAI is going to need to find a good replacement to fill her shoes. And this especially comes as bad news as OpenAI was planning on IPOing within the next 6 months or so. So with the restructuring, that could delay the process or even shake things up as investors may have less confidence going into it. Now, of course, we got to be fair here. So Alibaba and a few other Chinese companies found vulnerabilities within Claude Code and encouraged the government as well as other Chinese companies to pause and reevaluate what access Claude has to their information. A lot of this has to do with the regulations in China and permissions. So essentially what happened is Claude Code had built a backdoor tool that allowed information such as user location and identity when it can be verified to be collected. And of course, the Chinese government would prefer Americans not to have this information. So users were advised to uninstall Claude. Now, this week, we'll hear 2 stories towards Chinese model development, one of them being that DeepSeek is now developing their own chips, so they'll no longer be relying on external providers such as NVIDIA and Huawei for their chips. So back when the US banned imports from China for semiconductor manufacturing, NVIDIA gained a large market share domestically, while Huawei in China gained around half the market abroad. But there continues to be dilution as other Chinese companies such as Alibaba and large tech companies continue to build out their vertical stack. So it almost appears that DeepSeek is going to become the AI champion for China. And if we see the Chinese government continue to favor DeepSeek in this manner, then I think it'd be similar to if NVIDIA and OpenAI formed a joint venture. Now, here's where the situation could get sticky real fast. It looks like China might ban foreigners from accessing domestic models, which this could really provide a black box for US to understand what they're weighing themselves against when it comes to the Chinese capabilities, as well as not having access to as many open weight models. So my take on the situation is if anyone needs to cut off global access, it needs to be us first, because that could stifle companies internationally from catching up. And the concern I see is that if China does it first, they're going to catch up to a point where they're pretty confident that they could overcome. So I could see it becoming a disadvantage to the US. Now, switching to gaming, within Microsoft, Xbox announced a restructuring of 4,800 jobs, with 3,200 of those likely being laid off in the next year. That represents about 1.5% to 2% of their total workforce, depending on what happens with the other 1,600 jobs. And it appears that the Xbox business has been doing pretty poorly over the last couple of years. It doesn't sound like gamers are playing any less games, and there's more indie games to play, as well as Game Pass coming around, which is a monthly subscription, which everyone's accustomed to, that allows you to get access to certain games. So it kind of seems like Xbox and PlayStation and Nintendo no longer have as tight of a grip on gamers when it comes to distribution. And unrelated, but to my knowledge, Microsoft has been way lagging in AI. They really have the infrastructure necessary, but I don't think we've covered them once on this channel. So maybe that's something we could do more of a deep dive into. But so far, I've been pretty disappointed with the results from them these last few years. In fintech, Circle was recently approved by the OCC to provide the first national digital currency, which means US USDC is now federally backed as our digital reserve. This is a huge step forward for the global financial blockchain and digital banking, so huge shout out to Circle for this approval. And continuing with financial markets, in the first half of 2026, there was a little over 400 billion deployed, with 86% of it being AI related. And almost half of that, 48%, coming from three of the top firms, Founders Fund, Andreessen Horowitz, and Thrive Capital. And you can see over the last few years, it hasn't really been a free flow check environment for startup founders. It's been pretty tight, but expectations are to go back towards the mean. But I do want to reiterate, majority of the capital has come from the few and been allocated to few. So I'm not entirely certain if this chart accurately represents the majority of founders, but as far as the capital deployment goes, checks are moving around more frequently. Last week in Iran, the funeral procession for Ayatollah Ali was held. And you can see here a large square of people gathered to mourn their former leader. Although Tehran is a city of almost 10 million people, and you can't really know what the true number of this crowd was, you can see there's a lot of representation, and with Tehran being the capital, there may be a lot more support towards the regime and former leadership. But the main thing I want to add here is you can see how many people have gathered and how many people supported their former leader. So I don't know what majority of the population in Iran actually wants, but this is a signal to the quagmire we're currently in of where a good representation of people stand. And then wrapping it up, given that situation, I wanted to look a little bit at the energy outlook, which actually is pretty positive. It doesn't really seem like things are going to change too drastically, but the EIA estimates that we'll enter pre-conflict levels, which is good. If you enjoyed the video, please do me a favor and subscribe. And if you'd like to see prior week's recaps, you can click the playlist over here. And thanks for watching.